How a narcissistic man changes after losing true love. There is a strange moment that happens in the life of some narcissistic men. It is the moment when they realize the person they lost was not replaceable, not because nobody else exists in the world for them to pursue, but because true love gave them something their ego could never create alone. For years, they believed attention and admiration were the same as love. They confused validation with intimacy and control with connection. Then one day, the person who genuinely loved them walks away forever, and suddenly the noise disappears and the silence becomes unbearable. At first, he does not believe the loss is real. A narcissistic man often assumes that true love always returns eventually. He has seen people forgive him before and come back repeatedly. He expects the same cycle to continue one more time. He waits for the message, the apology, or the emotional invitation back in. His confidence convinces him that this separation is only temporary. But days become weeks, and weeks become months of silence. For the first time, he realizes he no longer controls the ending. The first change is confusion rather than heartbreak. Most people lose love and immediately feel sadness and grief. A narcissistic man often experiences wounded pride before emotional pain arrives. He asks himself how someone could leave after everything he offered them. He focuses more on rejection than on what he actually lost. His mind searches for explanations that protect his self-image. Maybe they were too emotional, or maybe they were unrealistic. Anything feels easier than accepting his own contribution to the loss. Eventually, another change begins to appear beneath the surface. The people he meets afterward do not feel the same. The conversations are flatter, and the attention feels temporary. He remembers how true love stayed during difficult moments and disappointments. He remembers the patience he once considered ordinary and guaranteed forever. Suddenly, the things he ignored become the things he misses most. The good morning messages become memories instead of annoyances. The loyalty he overlooked becomes impossible to replace elsewhere. For the first time, he begins comparing everyone to the person he lost. Not because he suddenly became romantic or emotionally mature overnight, but because authentic love creates emotional safety that performance cannot imitate. Many narcissistic men spend years chasing excitement instead of stability. They pursue novelty because novelty feeds admiration and attention. Yet true love offers something entirely different and much deeper. It offers acceptance without performance and connection without competition. That is often what they realize only after it disappears. The next change can be surprisingly uncomfortable for him. He starts revisiting old memories with unusual intensity and frequency. A restaurant becomes a reminder of conversations they once shared there. A song suddenly transports him back to moments he ignored at the time. Places become emotional landmarks connected to someone no longer present. Memories that once felt insignificant begin carrying emotional weight. He discovers that losing someone physically does not erase them psychologically. Sometimes absence becomes louder than presence ever was before. Some narcissistic men react to this discomfort by becoming more desperate. They start reaching out through messages that seem surprisingly emotional. They promise growth, change, and understanding they never showed previously. Sometimes these promises are genuine, and sometimes they are not. The difficult truth is that regret does not automatically create transformation. Missing someone and becoming a different person are separate experiences entirely. Many people confuse longing with personal growth and self-awareness. The two are related, but they are not identical. Another change often appears in the form of emotional restlessness. The distractions that once worked no longer provide the same satisfaction. Attention from strangers feels exciting, but only for brief moments. Validation loses some of its power to silence deeper emotions. He discovers that admiration cannot replace emotional intimacy forever. The ego may enjoy applause, but the heart seeks connection. For some narcissistic men, this realization becomes deeply unsettling. They spent years feeding one need while starving another. There are also narcissistic men who never allow themselves to learn. Instead of reflecting, they become bitter and resentful toward the loss. They rewrite history in ways that protect their self-image completely. They convince themselves that true love was weak or demanding. This story allows them to avoid responsibility and painful self-examination. Blame becomes a shield against guilt and regret. Unfortunately, shields protect wounds, but they never heal them. And unresolved patterns usually repeat themselves in future relationships. But some men experience something different after losing true love. The pain forces them to confront parts of themselves they avoided for years. They begin asking questions they never asked before this experience. Why was vulnerability so frightening to them in the first place? Why did closeness feel threatening instead of comforting and safe? Why did they sabotage relationships that actually made them happy? These questions can become the beginning of genuine transformation. Growth often begins where certainty finally comes to an end. True change does not happen because he feels lonely one night. It does not happen because he misses companionship during difficult moments. Real change begins when accountability becomes stronger than defensiveness. It begins when excuses lose their power to provide comfort. He starts listening instead of arguing and reflecting instead of blaming. He becomes curious about his patterns instead of protecting them endlessly. That journey is difficult because self-awareness threatens old identities. But it is also the only path toward lasting emotional growth. One of the hardest realizations he may eventually face is this: the person he lost did not leave because they stopped loving him. Many times they left because they loved themselves enough to stop suffering. That truth can be painful for someone accustomed to being pursued endlessly. It forces him to recognize that love alone cannot save relationships. Respect, empathy, honesty, and emotional safety matter just as much. Without those foundations, love slowly becomes exhaustion and disappointment. Even the deepest feelings eventually break under constant neglect. Perhaps the greatest change of all comes much later. He finally understands that true love was never his possession to control. It was a gift that required care, gratitude, and responsibility. The person who offered it was not weak for loving deeply. They were brave enough to love in ways he could not yet understand. And sometimes people only appreciate light after standing in darkness alone. Sometimes losing something becomes a lesson that having it never taught. Sometimes the ending becomes the beginning of self-discovery and change. So how does a narcissistic man change after losing true love? The answer depends entirely on what he chooses to do with the pain. Pain can create wisdom, or it can create bitterness and resentment. Regret can inspire growth, or it can inspire blame and denial. The loss itself does not determine the outcome of the story. The response to the loss determines everything that follows afterward. Because true love does not merely reveal who we are when it arrives. Sometimes it reveals who we are only after it is gone forever.